Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talking Instations midweek update. It is currently, for me at least, December 13th. For some people, it's December 14th. But that is beside the point. Today on the show, I have my co-host, Ron, USMC. Say hello, Ron. Oh, we didn't get that audio? Hey, that was super delayed. Ron, can you quickly tell us what corp and alliance are you from?
I'm from Test Alliance, and I'm in Dreaded, of course, the original.
Nice. And also on the show today, as you can see, we have Keskora.
Hey.
And also ExookiZ. Oh dear, so it looks like we're having the issue again, where neither I nor the stream can hear any of the audio that is happening. However, Craig, our bot that we use to record, can. So this'll be fun. Probably what's going to happen is I'm going to end up turning off the stream. That way we can have a proper show recording, and then you guys can listen to it in podcast format later. So I'm going to do a quick troubleshooting technical issue thing. We'll see how it works. And then we may be back on the stream or we may be shutting it down. So enjoy a black screen for a few seconds here, Twitch. I'm sorry, but we'll be back in a moment. Thank you for having the discussion for technical purposes. So stream, I'm sorry to say this, but there is an issue we're having with OBS that means when I'm streaming and you can see it, I can't hear any of the conversation and neither can you. So I'm going to test a thing where we're going to go to a black screen for the stream and you're going to get audio only. So you can still listen to the podcast being recorded live, but you won't be able to see our beautiful faces and our amazing propaganda. But we're going to try and let you listen live at least on a black screen. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's have a little bit more chatter. We ended off with Keskora. What group are you from?
I am the CEO of POS Party in the Ember Sands Alliance. We go by POSB is what most people know us from, which is our ticker.
Fantastic. And then ExookiZ?
I am from the Dark Space Initiative, which is the primary corp from Scary Wormhole people.
Gotcha.
Boo-boo.
So really quickly, because I made this mistake myself, and ExookiZ corrected me just before the show, the TD Sin hat you have on, how does that relate to Scary Wormhole people exactly?
Well, so TD Sin is actually the corp. I think it's funny. I think internally in Wormhole space, we're probably primarily referred to as just TD Sin, but externally, I'm sure most people probably know us by our alliance moniker of Scary Wormhole people. So they're one and the same, just one's the corp, one's the...
Cool. All right, well, let's quickly roll through some news, some of it wormhole related, some of it not. As we talked about last week, Triumvirate is still getting their solve burned by Scourge and by Skill Yourself. This is happening in Scalding Pass and Innsmother. Deterate has still not been touched. Fraternity is starting to contest some solve in Scalding Pass. They're finally taking the random slice system that was there, and it looks like they're starting to hit the Right Order Sov, which is one of the groups who was allied with BSOD, Bright Side of Death, in the recent fight they've been having with Fraternity, where reports are still going around that a surrender may be in the works, but we have no confirmation on that. Also in the news, you may have noticed that Hard Knocks is getting evicted from their current wormhole system it's called Rage. The actual system number is J115405. Keskora, ExookiZ, is this system with no effects, correct?
Yep, it's a C5 static 5 with anomalies.
Sweet. So that is the current situation as of right now. One of their keep stars, the keep star called Hard Knocks, it is the first keep star ever erected in the game, has been destroyed. Fort Knox. Gosh, thank you very much. Fort Knox has been destroyed. Other structures have been reinforced and will be dying over the next couple of days. Numerous pauses have been killed. Dreadnoughts have been self-destructed. Various items have been delivered to certain EVE personalities and as a result have been killed, ruining their kill boards. And all around, it's just going to be a bit of destruction happening in that wormhole from here on out. It's worth noting there's been a bit of fake news going around that I want to clear up. So, quite a few wormhole groups have been involved in the defense. Prior to the defense and even during it, a lot of people were saying that the wormhole community disliked Hard Knocks more than they disliked Nullsecers or the Imperium in particular, and so they would not be coming to the defense of Hard Knocks. So ExookiZ, Keskora, both of your groups were there for the defense. I know a lot of other groups were, No Vacancies, Laserhawks, to name a few. Were there any groups that were missing that weren't coming to help that you know of?
As far as I'm aware, unsurprisingly, the Russian wormhole community was not there. They're actually shooting Hard Knocks' other systems right now, and Wholesale was also not there, being two larger groups out there.
Is that from a lot of history between Russian wormhole groups and Hard Knocks, or?
So about a year ago, I think it was June. It was the summer of 2017. Hard Knocks destroyed the Inner Hell Keepstar and Inner Hell's C6 that they had as their actually, it used to be their home system. It wasn't even their main system anymore. They just didn't take the Keepstar with them. Because previously, everybody has memed and talked about how Keepstars were unkillable in a wormhole. Well, they went and killed it. It had Tech 2 Keepstar rigs. I think it's the most expensive thing to have ever died in EVE to date, at just shy of $1 trillion ISK and 1 kill mail, because it had the Tech 2 Doomsday rig fitted. So, bad blood there. And then I will think it was October of this year, just a couple months ago, Hard Knocks again evicted the Russians from their home system in a C2. So it surprises no one familiar with the two groups that the Russians were not terribly interested in helping defend Rage. There's some bad blood between Hard Knocks and Wholesale as well, a completely different story that we could probably talk about for just as long as a couple months ago. You might have remembered some of the memeing and the all the stuff going on Reddit from when Wholesale unanchored their Keepstar that they had in their C5, supposedly because they had caught wind that Hard Knocks was coming to evict them. No shots were ever fired, and Wholesale pulled out and some would say evicted themselves from their wormhole without Hard Knocks ever showing up. The exact truth of what went down there is probably very difficult to say because both sides spin a very different story. But that being said, again, no love for Hard Knocks from Wholesale.
And we're going to get further details on the Hard Knocks eviction in particular on our Sunday show this week. We're going to have some special guests who were directly involved in the attacking efforts of the eviction, as well as maybe some other guests. So you'll get to hear all the inside scoop on the particular details of this specific eviction. But on today's show, what we really want to do is provide history and context, right? So there's going to be a lot of jargon used. There's going to be a lot of mechanics that are sort of understood from the people having the discussion on the Sunday show that a lot of us wouldn't be familiar with as low-sec or null-sec or even high-sec players. So the purpose of today's show, why we have Keskora and ExookiZ, who are fantastic to come on the show today, is to sort of explain, give us a primer on what is Wormhole Life, how are wormholes different from other areas of space, who lives there, what's the gameplay like, what are the politics like, which seems to be a hot topic as of late. So let's jump right into it and start on the ground floor with game mechanics. What is the difference between wormholes and other areas of space?
Well, the biggest thing for wormholes is that the map is always changing. Like, if you want to get to a specific wormhole, you never really know how to. Like, you can't just be like, I'm going to go to Rage and then just like go there. Every wormhole has entrances and exits that are constantly changing, and that is pretty much the key element of wormhole space and how we live and how we function. So most wormholers have one system that's their home. A lot of them will have other holes for, ISK making purposes or industry or whatever, but each corp really lives in one home. Rage was Hard Knocks' home. Most wormholers name their home.
So what is your home name?
My home is named Nexus, my current one. If people watch the Talking Instations on my previous home that got evicted, it was called Hydra. So the Battle of Hydra was kind of the big fight that we had when we were facing eviction too. But our new home is called Nexus.
Is there a reason that you would pick one over a home? Because earlier ExookiZ said, "Oh, C4 sucks." Is there a reason that you would pick C2 or C5? Is that
Oh, definitely. I mean, just for people who aren't really quite aware about wormholes, there's 6 classes of wormholes, going from C1 to C6 is what we call it. C1 through 4 is considered low class space. C5 and 6 is high class space. The big differential factor there is that you can fit capitals through high class connections where you cannot in low class connections. I argued at my first wormhole talk that C4 space is kind of weird and like middle class, and people still meme me for that.
It's actually the worst.
Oh, you shut up.
What you're trying to say is that C4 space is the worst.
Well, see, that's the thing, is that everyone picks a wormhole to live in for various reasons. Some of it a lot of times it has to do with the static connections, which are those consistent connections that you always have coming in and out of your wormhole. Every wormhole has at least one static. C2 and C4 have 2 statics, which is why we chose C4, because we really like having the dual statics, because it gives us more chains and more places to roam and go to. But a lot of the big PvP groups, in fact, pretty much all the rest of the big PvP groups except for us, for the most part, live in C5 space, because then if they have a static that's another C5, the chances of them rolling into other PvP entities is higher, and they can bring capitals and or large fleets through those connections to have big fights.
That's really interesting.
So our C4 does have a C5 static too, but it is not capital supported because it has a C4 on one side. So while we still roll into those big groups, we can never bring a capital from our home outside ever. Which a lot of people, part of the big reason we got evicted is people didn't like that, because it meant if they fought us in our home, we could field caps and they couldn't, because they couldn't bring them in. So that was one of the big factors that the enemies always cited when they were evicting us. But, to each their own on how they decide to live their statics. We get memed on all the time for choosing a 4 instead of just doing another C5 static. But we like our 4. We like having the 2 statics. We like having lots of connections. So that's, an ongoing, I guess, wormhole meme, really, the C4 space meme.
So
we started in a C2. Our first wormhole we ever had was a C2 because it was it had a static high set. What?
Same Z's. Our first wormhole was a C2.
Yeah, a lot of groups start in C2s because they have 2 statics. One of them is always K-space. Then the other one is always a wormhole. So that way you get easy access to and from K-space, but then you also have access to deeper wormhole space. So it's really nice for new groups just starting out who maybe aren't quite as comfortable as being like deep into wormhole space.
Is there an advantage to going deeper into wormhole space apart from like bringing capitals in? Like, do you get better money making? Is it like, what's the draw to bring people into higher class space? I noticed you mentioned as well, a lot of people live in C5 space, but nobody really in C6. What's up with that?
So loosely, as you climb the ladder from 1 to 6, the anomalies and the sites found within will get both more difficult, but be worth more money. Some would argue that C4 space is actually like out of place on that scale, and that the sites are both harder but worth less than C3 sites, at least in regards to the ease of clearing them. C6s, there's significantly fewer C6s than there are C5s. We're talking a 1 to 5 ratio. And one of the things that kind of matters is if I have a system that has a static 6, like you've probably seen the word rage rolling thrown around talking about the Hard Knocks eviction. If I have a system that has a static 6, every single time I close my static 6, a new 6 will open. And since there's only about 120 or so C6s, I have slightly less than a 1% chance of getting the system I specifically want every time. to contrast that, there's over 560 C5s. So I've got like 1/5 the chance of getting the target system, which is why I'm sure there are plenty of groups out there that rage rolled trying to get into rage with the static 5, and they could have spent a whole 24 hours rolling and have never even gotten in. I mean, I think like some of my guys that were out there hunting for it, they rage rolled for almost 2 straight days, and they did get in. They got in once. They infilled a whole bunch of people. The people that didn't get in, start again, ping later, reform a fleet, keep trying. The second group, as far as I believe, they never reconnected. So like that's one of the reasons that a lot of people didn't live in C6s is it made it considerably easier for people to get specifically into your system. TDSN at one point did live in a 6. We lived in a C6 static 5. We lived in a 6 static 6 at one point. And that was one of the reasons that we moved out is Hard Knocks, Laser Hawks, and some Russians tried to evict us from our wormhole, and the ease of their ability to inject capitals into the system made it a lot easier for them to pull that off. But this was also back in the POS days when dreads were considerably more important for evicting wormhole corps than they are today. And sizes of corps were also smaller. So that's one reason. To answer one of your other questions, C6s are primarily used by their, I mean, I guess it's fair to also say most C5s and C6s are farms, in the same sense that a lot of nullsec is territory that's owned purely for ratters to just be running the anomalies in. The same is true for most of 5 and 6 space. It's purely there for a couple people to have their alts, and all they do is run the anomalies to make money. Since it's kind of one of those, like, no one lives in C6s because no one else lives in C6s, is also like most people of like a corporation that's going to have the manpower and the interest to live in the, in such a system is also the kind that's hunting for people to fight and kill. And since, there's nothing there but other people running sites, it's not as great. Contrasting to nullsec, the anomalies in wormhole space don't respawn as quickly, so it's the kind of thing where I might log in, I'll run all of my sites in 2 to 3 hours, and I'll log off, and that system has no one in it doing anything at all for days straight. So if you're wondering why I just said it's full of people running sites, and then I said also, but nobody's there hunting them, is because unlike in nullsec where you might have a bunch of ratters running anoms 24/7, it's a dartboard where you'll run into systems that are just empty because you've got to catch them right at that only time of the week that they're running site.
So
really quickly,
you just hit on some. Oh, go ahead.
No, ask your question.
Yeah, you hit on something that I want to clarify on, because nullsecers, like, I have no idea, right? It's scary wormhole people, right? So people were talking earlier today about the amount that you get from sleeper sites in wormholes. And you were talking about, C1 to C6, and C6 is the most valuable. And the number that I heard was, since you don't get ticks, which is what nullsec gets, right? You get salvage, and then you have to sell that salvage to NPC. And they were saying that I think it was a C6 site, you can get something like 650 million in salvage. Is that right?
So most of that was right. I'll clarify a couple technicalities, really. There's 2 types of loot that you get from wormhole sites. There is salvage that you get from actually salvaging the wrecks, and then there's what's frequently called blue loot, which are these items that are only bought by NPCs. So they're technically still an ISK faucet, in the sense that once I carry it back to case base, I'm getting money that previously didn't exist in the EVE economy. Except it's not as direct as bounty payments. The salvage in wormhole space is actually abysmal, which is a completely separate topic I can complain about for a variety of reasons. But the salvaging sleepers is generally not bothered by most of your wealthier people. Site-wise, most C5 and C6 anomalies are going to net you between 450 to upwards of 700 million in a single site, depending on how you. Mind you, the sites generally take a lot longer than what your nullsec anomaly might. So it's not like I'm running one of these 700 mil anomalies every 5 minutes. Well, I might be, but only with a significantly more expensive setup. Like your top tier setup that people runs anomalies with in C6 space and sometimes C5s is usually 3 dreadnoughts and a Rorqual, 4 capitals on field to run that 700 mil site in 5 to 10 minutes, locked generally by their siege cycles. So it is like you might be running it that fast, but that's not how a lot of people run. C5 sites are most commonly run by a pair of nesters or rattlesnakes that are tinker, either remote repping each other or remote capping each other. And that's something that's easy to dual box as a single person. That'll clear you a site in 20 to 25 minutes. That gimmick also abuses some other. They're not. 300 million ISK of every C5 and C6 anomaly is in a single NPC, which is the drifter. Most commonly in C5 space, if you're not running them with capitals, is you actually spawn the drifter but let him freely roam your system, and you kill him later when he comes to your Astra house, because for whatever reason CCP lets you shoot NPCs with your Astra house, and it turns out that the super heavy torpedo launchers that you can fit to an Astra house can do a number on drifter NPCs.
Really quickly, Keskora, it's been mentioned multiple times, rage rolling and rolling wormholes and things. What is that? What does that mean?
So wormholes can, they open and close based on 2 different factors. One of them is time. When a wormhole spawns, it'll have between, I think the shorter ones are like 16 hours or the longer ones are like 24 hours. And there's some variance. There's always like a 10% variance there. Yeah, 48. Yeah. So in any case, they'll just expire on their own naturally, or if you put enough mass through them, then they will collapse as well. So each type of wormhole will have a different amount of mass that can be sent through it at one time, and is also a different cap of mass that can be sent through it over time. So like the C1 class 1 wormholes can only fit up to medium-sized ships. So you can only put battle cruisers and below, except for nesters, because they're tiny. And then the other low-class wormholes up to 4 can handle up through battleships, and then C5 and 6 can handle up to capitals, no supers. And then depending on the wormhole, they have somewhere usually, I mean, the smallest ones are like 500 mil mass or something for like the C1, real tiny. And then the biggest ones are like, 5 bill? Exo, you know this better. You have the big capital wormhole.
Well, actually, all the capital wormholes are 3.3 billion. The wormhole with the most mass is actually, I think it's a C3's high sec, has 5 billion.
That's it. Yep, that's right. The silly C3 high secs. So if you send that much mass through it, it will go through different stages. It'll go from full mass to we call stage 2, which is it'll shrink down once it gets to 50% of its mass. And then it will get to critical, which is when it's within 25%, I think, of its mass. So you can kind of gauge when you're collapsing a hole how much mass is left. But if it's a brand new hole and you know what hole it is, like a static, for instance, you know generally how much mass you need to immediately send through and back to collapse it in as short of time as possible. So that is what rage rolling is, basically, is getting a brand new hole, checking what's on the other side, and then if you like it or you don't like it, collapsing it immediately, and then a new static will spawn, and then check that one. And if it's what you want, then cool, and if not, you collapse it immediately again. So for rage, that's what people were doing, basically. They were just repeat rolling holes over and over and over and over again, hoping they get the right one.
Do you have it down to such a science that you don't ever get ships stuck on the other side? Right?
If it's a brand new hole, yeah. If it's a brand new hole, you can pretty much shut it every time. There's also some tricks you can do, like when we had our C4 statics. You can't fit capitals through C4, so you roll it with battleships. And we knew depending on how many battleships we sent through, if it shrunk or not, then how to send them through the other way. Because there's also ways you can play with mass. If you use a prop mod, it increases your mass. Hick bubbles, well, I guess not bubbles anymore. They got that special new module, will shrink them. And so you can play around with the mass to limit the chances that you'll get rolled out. But there's often times when you're fighting where you don't have the luxury of really sitting down and calculating how much mass you have, or you have just no idea how much mass has been on that wormhole before. Because when it's stage 2, it could have like anywhere between 50% and 25% of its mass. So you might think you're good, but you might just totally miscalculate and end up getting stuff rolled out. But that's why a lot of wormholes.
The Higgs module, right? The Higgs thing.
I mean, yeah. Well, the Higgs rigs are another factor that help with that variance.
Okay.
That was a really great gift to wormholers, the Higgs module, because before that we didn't have that, so we didn't have quite a way to adjust our mass as well. But prop mods make your mass go up and down, and the Higgs rigs. There's a couple factors at play. But we've often had times though where we'll be fighting PvP on a wormhole, and people will purposefully put ships through it to make the mass more unstable, to limit the chances of people being able to escape, or you'll just be trying to get out, so you'll jump back and forth a couple times so that they can't target you as much, and that will destabilize the mass. So then when the fight's over, you can't all get home.
These are classic POSB techniques for when you're fighting with.
So let's talk about the fighting a bit. Does it always happen on wormholes? Are there like roaming gangs in wormholes? Is it you only get a fight if you go and shoot someone's farming structures? How do fights happen?
Most of the time, so there's two main types of PvP that you see in wormhole space. One is your ganks, which is, I find someone running sites or hauling ships or doing something, and I form a fleet and I go and I just drop on them, dunk them, and then I leave. Your fights are mostly, like, most of your actual day-to-day fights are, and I'm sure some people will probably yell at me for calling it this, most of them I would say are mostly consensual fights, in the sense that two corporations connect and say, I'd like to form a fleet and fight you. They both form fleets, and then they smash them into each other and one side wins. That's not to say that there isn't tons of drama and both people are going to complain about the other side, you cheated, or, like you brought too many people, et cetera, et cetera. But, most of your fights are based off of that. There are, the fights that you usually hear about because they reach the scale that are like especially interesting, maybe because someone's being evicted and you've got your last stand home defense doctrines, lots of capitals, really expensive ships, etc. But those are the minority of PvP that happens. I mean, there for sure you can gather some PvP from going and shooting people's structures and waiting for them to come respond. But that's not done that commonly because of the logistics. Like if I go into someone's system to shoot it, I have to wait at least 24 hours for them to come. So I've got to go camping in their territory, no longer connected to mine at some point. And, it's done, but I wouldn't say it's done that frequently. Most of your content is just people finding each other in the chain, and or they find each other, both paying, both form fleets, and then go at it. You don't really see roaming in the sense that, like, as wormholers make their map, I already know what's in all those systems. Like as I'm exploring to see where my wormholes go, I already know which systems had people in or not. So you're not going to have people just forming like a little 5-man roam and say, let's just go roaming through the wormholes and see what we find, because most of those systems are probably empty. You're going to find nothing. That's not to say that if we get nullsects, like if we find nullsec connections, you're going to have a fleet. They'll go roaming out to null, but like right now I can look at my mapper and see that TDSyn's got roughly 20 odd wormholes going in this big, ugly, grotesque chain moving from one side of my screen to the other. we already know what's in all these systems ish, at least enough to know that we're not going to get anything just patrolling back and forth. Because the other thing that wormholer, like if we're hunting, is once we map out a bit, if it's dead, we roll our wormhole and start again with the whole new chain. We just keep doing that until we find something. We don't, usually get a chain and then just sit and wait to see if something's going to show up. Because
I will say that with wormholers, one of our prime motivating factors of just being a wormholer is that we want a PvP. Like, there's no reason to gain territory to expand our SOV or our reach. When we jump into other groups, we want to because we want to fight. For the most part, I mean, at least a lot of the big PvP entities, a lot of the big wormhole groups, they're centered on PvP. I would say out of all of the biggest wormhole groups, I don't think that any of them have like an industry focus. I mean, there's like individual wormholers that are, but for the most part, we want to fight. So we're looking for stuff to fight. People scan the chain to look for other people and to try to find content and fights. Like, we've got people that'll scout and they'll keep scanning, and if they find stuff, they'll send out a ping and we'll run down the chain and hopefully get some fights out of it. And if we don't, then we roll the chain and continue on. Because having like 50 connections is great, but not if there's nothing in them. It'd be more useful to have like 3 connections with an active group than to have a ginormous web of nothing.
So, that's interesting. I guess, so I have kind of a question, because what out of, like, let's say 100% of the times that you find another group in a wormhole that's close to yours, are they friends with you? Are they kind of like, we're not going to evict you, you don't evict us, let's fight, let's form fleets? Or, how many times out of 10 do you find a group and you're like, oh, we don't like these people and we want to evict them?
I feel like wormhole space in general is full of frenemies. Like, TD Sin and us are allies. They helped us in our eviction. I like ExookiZ a lot. I've met him in real life. We've had some good drinks together and some good fun. But if I see TD Sin in the chain, it's a great day because we're going to fucking kill some shit. And they're going to kill a lot of our shit too. That's just how it goes.
You mean you're going to die?
I mean, yeah, but hopefully we'll kill some stuff too. But that's the kind of relationship I like, the kind of group that we can roll into. We can be like, yo, what's up? Let's get some action. Let's form some stuff. And we ping all our guys and we get as many people on and we smash face into each other. And then we, fight until we're done. And we say, great job. See you next week. And then we roll on and look for more stuff to do. And I feel like a lot of the big groups, we're always excited to see people because that means there's going to be fights and there's going to be content, which is what wormholers live for.
You are both the CEOs of your respective corporations. It's worth mentioning that. But you're also, both of you are USTZ. Does that mean your groups are also USTZ focused? Is that a consistent thing in wormholes? Do we see like a separation between USTZ, EUTZ, AUTZ, things like that?
There's some. I mean, there are some groups that are primarily one time zone or another. A lot of the big groups have at least some coverage in other time zones. Like, we've got a European group. It's not as big as our US group, but it's quite good. But there's other groups like, there's the Aussies that came to help us, which are always great. And oh my God, Sin Alarm is going to hate me because I'm totally blanking on my exit strategy. Oh my God, it's so terrible. I'm going to get such crap for that. But they're like the resident Australian wormhole corp. And then like Whole Control is mainly European. So they've got a lot of Euros in their group. But then everyone has at least some spattering over all the time zones for the most part. Though I would say we are primarily USTZ. But I mean, my Euros are probably better than a lot of my US guys. Don't tell them.
So you mentioned you roll your wormhole or you scan the chain to find some fights. In C1 and C1 space, they only have K space statics. Same with C3 space. So the groups that live there, they're just not PvP organizations. They're purely there for PvE, or is the frequency of random wormholes spawning into your hole enough that you could be a PvP organization living in a C1 or a C3?
Well, I mean, there's some groups that live in a C3 with a static nullsec specifically to constantly hunt in the nullsec. I'm not aware that any PvP groups live in a C1, mainly because the mass restrictions in there aren't super conducive to fighting. There's definitely none that I would say I have on my radar as like noteworthy PvP corps, but I'm sure there's a couple out there. Likewise, there are very few corporations that live in a C3 for similar reasons, but less the mass issue as much as if I want a C3 with a static null, I can have a C2 with a static null that also has a static 5 or 6 that gives me an additional route to go searching for content or logistical exits or money making.
So
I mean,
let's
pretty much a day, I'll just say it, like a day in the life for wormholers, like at the beginning of the day, the first person logs in and they start scanning pretty much, because everything starts in your home system and then everything branches out from there. So it's all about, I mean, like we live in a C4, but we do very little in our own home. It's just our home base for where we live, where we have all our ships, and then we go out from there. So a lot of more how we play is dependent on our statics. So we always are scanning and looking for more stuff. So if you live in like a C2, you know, you're always going to have your high sec, and you always are going to have some sort of wormhole connection. Or I guess not high sec. You're always going to have a case base. So there are actually some PvPers that like that C2 nullsec C5 because they've got the nullsec, they got the outlets for roaming, but then they also have the wormhole space they can go up. But those chains lead to all kinds of stuff. I mean, there's plenty of people who live in C5 space that they always have case-based connections. It's just a couple more down the chain. It's not guaranteed it's going to be good, and if it sucks, it's kind of hard to. You then have to like scan a whole new chain to find a better one. Whereas people with a high sec static, if they don't like it, they can just roll it and get a better one.
A day in the life sounds like it involves many, many hours of scanning.
I mean, there's a lot of scanning. We don't know our connections. We always have to scan. But there's a lot of people that really enjoy scanning. We've got some fantastic scanners in our group. Like that's their main thing they like to do. They like scanning, and they are happy to be that key scanner, which is great.
And I've seen wormholers scan. You guys are really quick. Really quick. I mean, it's
we have one guy in our corp who we started keeping logs of. We have a custom mapper that one of our corp mates made. He started logging how many signatures people scan, and every month there's one guy that has at least 50% of all of the scanning done. It's nuts. This guy's a machine. I don't even know how he manages to do it. It's nuts.
You mentioned a mapper. I heard that there's different programs that automatically or can map the wormhole chains.
The mapper is.
I mean, asking for a friend.
I mean, the mapper is the most important tool pretty much of any wormholer, because if you can't see where you are or what you're connected to, you won't be able to really do much of anything. You won't, like if someone gets tackled, if someone gets stuck, if you need to help somebody, you don't know where to go without having that tool to really check where you're going. So there's several different mappers out there, but it's essential pretty much if you're going to be in wormhole space, you have to have one. People argue about which one's the best. I mean, obviously I'm biased. We've got a custom one. So, you know, I always will favor that one because I know how much time our corp guys spent on it. But there's Tripwire, there's Siggy, there's Pathfinder, and Vippy. I guess those are like kind of the big, more well-known ones. Ours is called Galaxy Finder, which is also available out there too. But
that's a silly name though, because there's only one galaxy in you.
I mean, I didn't come up with a name. I don't know. Ask Chingy. But but the thing is, it's all about. I mean, everyone uses the mapper kind of, you know, and they all have their preferences. But ultimately, it's the same kind of thing. You copy your scan window, you paste it into the mapper, and you start scanning. And when you do, you add the result to the mapper, and it will show in some sort of visual representation. So if it's a data site, if it's a relic site, you'll have that log. If it's a gas site, you'll say what it is. And then wormholes will have this kind of like tree or blob or branch or web, however it's laid out, that will kind of expand out from your home to show all the different paths. And then you can, usually there'll be something in there to update if it's like a frigate only wormhole, which there are some that you can only fit frigate or smaller. or if it's been masked already, so you know that it's going to be close to collapsing, if its time is up. So that way you can look real quick and get a really good idea of what your current star map looks like, basically.
So let's really quickly go through ExookiZ. When we were chatting about the show a while back, you sort of gave me a really thorough list of who are the residents of Wormholes, like who are the groups, what do they do, what's their shtick, if you will. Could you quickly give us a rundown, like who lives in Wormhole space, like really who are they type?
Sure. So, the rough, easiest way that I usually give this answer, I maintain a roster, so to speak, of all the different wormhole corps based on their kill activity that I compile based off of CCP's kill dumps that they release in the MER every month. So it's there are for sure corporations out there that don't really even make much mention on the list. There's a lot out there, probably more different corporations than I think people really probably expect. So right now, and it shifts like in a somewhat kind of order, because this order would change on a monthly basis. There's probably, what I would say is, there's a couple, we'll call them like mega corporations, that are right at the top, similar to how you might have in nullsec, in which if I ask you to name me the like top dogs, you can probably count them all on one hand. You've got Hard Knocks, Laserhawks, No Vacancies, and the Dark Space Initiative as the largest corps. And I did exclude Ember Sands from that list, mainly because unless I've missed some like major size growth, they're not quite generally at the size that the other four that I just listed. Sure. Okay. Yep. So you've got TD Sin, Laserhawks, Hard Knocks, and Novak as the biggest ones. I don't want to. Tier's probably not the right word to use, because there's certainly times when corporations, that are smaller on that maybe are smaller on the list, actually outperform and do a lot more than some of the others. Other big corporations of note, of sound mind, Pos Party, Mind Games, Wholesale, Odin's Call. Like, I'm listing a lot of your bigger names there.
Just throwing it out there. We have more people than No Vacancy right now, so take that.
Fair enough. It shifts around. Like, these are your biggest names. What I'd say is important to note is, unlike, but I'm not an expert in nullsec by any means. Unlike nullsec, there are hundreds of corporations that are standalone wormhole corporations that are out there right now, living in their wormhole, having small scale PvP with each other, many of which seem to just evaporate or disappear when the bigger groups roll through the chain. They hide and pretend that they're not there. But at the end of the month, when I compile my listings, there's corporations that that you've either never heard of or didn't make that list. Like what I just rattled off to you are the biggest ones. There are hundreds more every year at FanFest. So if this is something, if you're like deeply interested in wanting to know about the who's who, for the past 4 years, every year at FanFest, I've given a Game of Holes presentation, actually, where I walk through all of the who's who's based on how much killboard activity they had. I make notes of big special things that happen every year. I mean, I could keep rattling off names, but we could go on for literal ages, listing corporations until we reach some arbitrary point where we say the corps below this line stop mattering, which is what I have to do when I'm making these lists for FanFest. But there's literally hundreds of corporations that are at least of some relevance, depending on what perspective you have. From the perspective of some people at the very top, I can say right about here, I don't care about those people, but if we move further down, I'm sure that the list of people that are relevant to you shifts and changes as well, because there's corporations out there that can surprise you, or you see them successfully pulling off some big gank in nullsec or having a fight, and you're just like, I didn't realize they had that many people. But that's just kind of a day in the life for some of these corporations, really.
It's kind of interesting because I've never heard of a lot of those groups. Where would a dirty nullsec F1 monkey hear about like these really big groups? Unless every now and then there's like a group will just pop up in the middle of our space, and it contains like 4 alliances, and it's like 40 people, but it's like, okay, I'd never even heard of any of these people, and they're flying like legions. And so, I mean, where would I hear about them besides r/Eve?
Well, we're actually, a lot of the things that go down wormhole space you don't see on r/Eve in a lot of ways, because while a lot of these fights really matter to people who are involved or to other people in wormhole space, in the grand scale of Eve, a lot of people see them as pretty small potatoes, because they're not these big, super epic fights full of supers with tie-dye and thousands of people involved. They're not these crazy things that you think you'd write home about. But in the wormhole community and people in here, it is like a lot of these fights we look at, we're like, oh man, that's so crazy, look at all this stuff, and other people out on the outside are just like, what do you guys think this is so cool about? I don't get it.
So there's a difference in scale between the fights, and so that's why they don't get reported on?
In some ways, and also just because a lot of times the technicalities, I think, maybe have a little bit more nuance to them, because a lot of these are smaller in scale, so each little piece can have really big consequences. But a lot of times, to someone looking in, it might be hard to see how that is so far-reaching.
So speaking sort of with regards to the metagame, the politics, the relations between these various groups, you two, Keskora and ExookiZ, have had quite a bit of banter on the show. Is that like drama, banter, little rivalries, being frenemies, is that common in wormhole space? Or are you constantly like trying to get each other's goat and make fun of each other in a friendly way? Does it get hostile? Like what's the political environment like?
It varies a bit from group to group, but I would say for the most part, that banter is common across most of the groups. It for sure, in some cases, does and can escalate into hostility. It would not be the it would not be unheard of for some people to be engaged in a less than friendly PvP engagement and/or eviction that might have spawned from things people said that hurt other people's feelings. That has happened in the past. But I'd say, most of the corporations in wormhole space recognize that to some degree, like we're here for similar reasons. Do the wormhole space thing, go get fights, go have fun PvPing. So we see each other as peers of some caliber. We shoot each other, we gank each other, we meme on each other, and that's kind of the circle of life. I mean, sometimes some corporations fall out, or there's grudges that people attempt to call in on, and that all happens just as much as I'm sure it does in a lot of places of Eve. But I'd say the banter is pretty common. Sometimes it can seem a little aggressive banter from some groups, but I think that's just the nature of people. Some people are friendlier than others, and some people live to shit on other people. So.
And also, I think there's a lot of like camaraderie, because you guys, are separate, right? Like you're wormholers, and if I show up to either of your doorstep, with 50 dinosaurs, like you guys are going to team up, right? I mean, you're going to bat phone, right, and be like, hey, the F1 monkeys are here. What's up? Are you going to come help?
I mean, every group kind of has their go-to bat phones. I mean, if we get something big, usually ExookiZ is the person I call, because I know him. I know we've flown together before. I know that he's not going to be someone that's going to like show up and then turn around and kill us. So, he's probably going to be the one I call. But we've also had instances. We had one time where we tackled a capital and we got rolled out in the process, and we're just stuck tanking this capital forever. And we're trying to scan down a new chain, and we happened to run into Laserhawk's home while we were trying to find an exit. So we were like, hey guys, so 3 jumps this way, we got a cap tackle, want to come hang out and kill it? And they showed up and they killed it, and we had a good time, and they gave us an exit, and we went on our way. So it's,
That's
you get
nice.
those instances too.
I think as we've been having this podcast, our combined fleet is currently dying to bark.
Wait, dying to who? Dying to what? What's happened?
We attempted to go shoot Rorquals, and they, judging from the lack of Rorqual kills, failed to kill a Rorqual, and then lost some ships to the response fleet. Which I'm pretty sure we thought was exactly how it was going to go down, but never not try to kill Rorqual.
I like that sentiment. That's fantastic. Speaking of oracles, one final note I want to ask. Moon mining came to wormholes. I personally set up myself in a C3 nullsec static, set up with a couple of Athenors. Eventually I did, mining isn't my thing, so they went low power and got killed. But do wormhole groups, do you guys do the moon mining thing? I know Satonia actually lost a Rorqual mining in a wormhole. Is that a regular occurrence, or is it just sort of an oddity if somebody actually involves themselves in that mechanic?
I think a lot of people moon mine. Rorquals, I want to say, are a little less common because a bit of for their expense, it's kind of like if someone rolls into me and tackles my Rorqual, with the exception of most of your larger groups, it's most likely going to die. Because nullsec Rorquals live because they can light a Sino and have backup jump straight onto them to come save you, or a gigantic support fleet isn't that many jumps away. But if I'm a smaller wormhole corp and Pos Party rolls into me and tackles my Rorqual is probably dead because I can't light a Sino. I have no way of instantly getting back up to me. So I know, because just from scanning, you see a lot of Athenors in wormhole space, most of which are on moons. I can only put 2 and 2 together and assume that if they've bothered to put an Athenor on the moon, they're mining. They're most likely mining with Orcas, Hulks, Covetors, and your subcaps. There are for sure groups out there that have Rorquals. We've bagged some over the past couple months. I don't know off the top of my head if Pos Party has, but I hope they have, because yay, Rorqual kills. But they're out there. They're dying. I'd say, much more so than nullsec. Most wormhole space mining is probably done with subcaps, but I don't have any sort of fancy CCP data to back that up. But moon mining is pretty common.
I will say the reason they moon mine is not for the moon goo. It's just for the other ore that comes from it. Because the moon goo that spawns in wormhole space is very meh. But the ore that spawns is very good. So I do think it's funny. There was one time I was on Talking Instations a while back, and there was some nullsec guy that was swearing that by adding moon goo to wormholes, you're going to see fleets of 20 oracles and low class, like C1 and C2 space moon mining. And I was just like, God, I hope there's fleets of tons of oracles in low class space. That would be great.
There are. I know of 2 C1s that both have double-digit Rorqual fleets that go mine.
We need more of those. More
on my list.
These people are sadly way too paranoid to make as good a target as I wish they were. But
so they feel safe because people can't seed their wormhole. Like, it's hard to jump combat fleets into them. Like, is that basically the? Why are they comfortable doing?
Well, in low-class space, you can't drop caps in there. So if anyone wants to bring a cap to kill a Rorqual, they have to build it in that wormhole. So they're already a little bit more secure in that sense. And then, on top of that, they can roll the connections before they start mining, and it decreases the chance of them having people just randomly jump into them. There's still always that chance, but it makes it much more secure. And so for large Rorqual fleets, they at least feel secure enough in that if anyone that would jump through, it would be hard for them to get enough enemies in to kill that many oracles before the oracles could get off or kill them.
You know, I'll be honest, wormholes just sound like a lot of work. It sounds like a lot of work.
That's what makes it so rewarding, though. I mean, it's all part of it. Like it's Eve hard mode. A lot of people, I've heard a lot of people say that, and I would have it no other way. It just makes the game so much more meaningful to me to know that we're putting this extra kind of work and mechanics in, and in the end, it makes it satisfying. It makes me feel like I'm doing something.
At the end of the day, where do you guys recruit people from? I know that a lot of you guys are kind of small, tight-knit groups. Do you guys recruit from the normal channels? Do people kind of search you out? How does that work?
I mean, I know. I think we recruit from basically the same place that everybody does. We're on our Eve jobs. Some corps go for the recruiting channel in game. A lot of people come into wormhole space and decide they want to stay in wormhole space. So a considerable amount of people that you have joining your corp are coming from other corps saying, this one wasn't as big as I wanted. They have no idea what they're doing. Maybe my corp died. Maybe we got evicted and the corp decided that they're not going to rebuild. All things that happen. We see just as many people coming in. It's one of the most common things I think I hear is people coming in and saying, like, I'm sick of nullsec. I want to do something else, because for the, just like you said, it's a very different Eve experience. I mean, I've met plenty of people that have been playing this game for 6+ years and say, like, I've never done wormhole space, or maybe it scratches that itch that they want, and they come in and they're like, I'm a pro at this. Like, I have guys in my corp, they're like, I have a Titan, but I have no fucking clue what I'm doing in wormhole space. Like, there's that level of disparity, and that's a thing that exists. So I think that's it's for sure not everybody's cup of tea. It's work. There is scanning. I can't log in, jump straight into some action that maybe nullsec can give me. We have ping warriors just like nullsec has. We've got plenty of people that don't do anything until the ping goes out saying, hey, we've got content. And just like I suspect is the case for most of K-Space, nullsec, lowsec, is, content creators are a rare breed. And you've got a couple people that are actually making all this stuff happen, and then the giant pile of people falling behind. And that's true in wormhole space as it is anywhere else. But for a variety of the different reasons we've touched on tonight, it's a different experience than a lot of the rest of Eve. And for some people, that's very attractive. And for some people, it's not. But I think Keskora hit one of the nails on the head, at least, that the amount of work a lot of wormhole space stuff takes, I think, really adds to the fact that when things go right and when you gank that work wall or you have that big fight, like, it feels a bit more rewarding than maybe a win in nullsec might, because you as an individual were less instrumental in that victory than you might be in a wormhole fight. Now, I've never done nullsec, so I can't say from personal experience that feeling exists, only that I hear that frequently. And I can see why that would be the case.
Having done both, I can definitely confirm that it is significantly more rewarding to both participate in and have victories in wormhole fights versus nullsec fights. Unless you're like the FC in a nullsec fight, or maybe a Logi command or something like that, the amount of impact you have on that fight is significantly lower in nullsec than it would be in wormhole space. Any final thoughts before we wrap up? Anybody got any shout-outs they want to give?
Well, I will say one thing is that, we talk about how wormhole space is a lot of work and there's a lot that goes into it. But if you've got a good group to fly with, it doesn't really seem like a lot of work, because everyone's chipping in, everyone's doing something. And when you have a good group to fly with, it makes all the difference. So for me, we started small and we grew, and now we're a pretty good group. And I'm really happy with where we are. And there's a lot of good groups out there that if you find, it's like anywhere, you find the right corp that fits you, and everything else will just come.
Nobody has any shout-outs? Everybody hates their corporations? Forget those guys.
Everyone calls me Space Mom. They all know I love my space nerds.
Well, I'm from, a very small fledgling corp. I don't even know if we're going to make it to next year. Dreaded.
Oh yeah.
Test.
I think I've heard of those guys. Are you recruiting?
Dreaded is recruiting, actually. So that's, totally off the
Good to
wall.
know.
I didn't know that all three of you
Boo
were
is also
wormholes.
recruiting.
Yeah. So are we. All right, we're recruiting too.
Hey, on that note, do you guys have like an in-game channel or something? Or see, another co-pilot. I love it. Keskora just has a puppy on cam now.
It is very unfortunate that no one
Hello,
will ever
doggo.
see how cute that.
Well, it was just like we were talking about in Twitch. This is it's a wormhole stream. There's no local. You don't get to know who's talking, just that someone's talking. So you just have to use your imagination to figure out what else is going on here, because mysteries of wormhole space and what.
All right, well that will do it. Oh, go ahead,
I
Ron.
was just gonna say, you guys, what's your in-game channels? Your in-game recruiting channels, so somebody can get a hold of you.
So for Waboo/TDSyn, you can head to TDSyn Pub to both talk to some people. That's where high-level diploing sometimes takes case, and it has links and instructions for further people that are interested in trying to apply and join TDSyn. Is TDSyn space PUB Pub is the place.
We've got our Ember Sands public channel, but our recruitment channel is Pos Party Time with an exclamation point.
All right, well, that'll do it for this very mysterious episode of the Talking Instations Midweek Update. Don't forget, now that you've got all the context, you've been filled in on what it's like to live in wormhole space and a bit of the groups behind it, tune into this Sunday's episode where we're going to have some behind-the-scenes look into the eviction that's been happening with Hard Knocks. Thanks again to my co-host Ron, USMC, this week, and my fantastic guests, ExookiZ and Keskora. That'll do it. We'll see you next week.
Have a good
Bye,
night.
everybody.